Hello, fellow SREs. Welcome back to SRE with Ben. Today, we're going to learn about configuring instrumentation. I'll be going through all the components of APM in AppDynamics in detail in this video. Whenever there's a cross mark on your icon, that means those are exclude rules, whether it is custom or automatic. You can have exclude rules as well. These are some of the exclude rules that AppDynamics uses by default. Under this section, you can also configure a business transaction lockdown. Once you have a set of business transactions in AppD and you would like to lock down on it and you want your app agent not to detect any more new business transactions, then you can enable it here. After this, even if you have any new business transactions with new URIs or new web service calls, your AppDynamics agent will not report it to the controller. Then there is transaction automatic cleanup. This is used for your sanity checks of your business transactions to monitor relevant business transactions and to kill what is not required. Then other options under instrumentation are backend deduction. So backend deduction is used to configure your backends. Backends are basically exit points, and by default, AppD comes up with a lot of backends that are normally used by your applications. Here you see Amazon S3, SNS, Cassandra, JDBC calls, your Kafka queuing, and your RabbitMQ, many other endpoints. If you do not see your endpoint here, or if you have a custom endpoint that you would like to configure, you can do that by scrolling down and clicking on Add here and defining which class is calling that endpoint and what are the rules for that endpoint. If you have a microservice architecture and for some reason one of your microservice call is not deducted by default by AppD, you can configure those type of backends as well here. You can select what type of backend it is and you can give the configurations required for that backend. I can define which class is calling that backend, which method, what are the details regarding to that call, etc. Here. Then we have the error detection section. By default, AppD uses the Java util logging and log4j to deduct your exceptions from your code. If you have a custom requirement to capture few exceptions that is not captured by AppD by default, then you can add those here. If you are using any other library other than log4j, you can add those custom logger definitions here. You can add your exceptions to ignore, your messages to be ignored which are being logged, and you can also add your HTTP return code errors. If you have a custom error code range and you would like to monitor those as well, you can add those here by giving what code it is and what is the upper bound and lower bound for it. You can also add your error detections through page redirects, etc. So even the error detection can vary based on your technology used. Each technology has its own error logging mechanism and which package is used for it. Next, we have the service endpoints. Your service endpoints are very similar to business transactions, but the only difference is in business transactions, you have the performance metrics being monitored, and also you have a complete view of your code and what is the trace route, how the code is performing. But in service endpoint, you just collect the performance metrics of that service instead of collecting the trace route and how the code is flowing in your service endpoint. If you have any web service calls or method calls that are executed within a business transactions and you would like to only monitor the performance metrics of that web service call or the method call instead of knowing the complete trace route, then you can configure it as a service endpoint. Even in service endpoint deduction, you have two options. One is automatic and one is custom. Here you can configure on which tier and what type of entry point it is, the rule configuration to match, and if you would like to use split transactions using request data here as well. So your service endpoint will always only contain the performance metrics and not the complete trace route of your transaction. We spoke about data collectors in our previous session. You can also configure data collectors from here. Then we have the call graph settings where we can define how your call graphs are determined and displayed on your console. So you can customize your call graph settings here. For example, your methods taking less than 10 milliseconds are not shown in your call graph. Here also you have options to ignore packages from your call graphs. For example, here you see most of these packages are server level packages that need not be tracked as part of your call graph. If you have any packages to be excluded, you can add that here as well, giving the package name or class name. You can also define the SQL capture settings here. There are two options here. One is capture raw SQL, wherein you'll get the entire SQL with the actual values that is being passed to the query. Or you can use filter parameter values, where you will get the queries with a question mark rather than your actual data. This can be used to avoid confidential information being displayed on the AppD console. Then you have the JMX section where you can configure various JMX metric rules as per the JMX type, active MQ. AppD already has settings for all popular messaging queues by default. You can add your custom queues here as well. Once you configure these settings here, you can view these resources under your application tab. Service endpoints will be displayed here. By default, AppDynamics is detecting the pet store slash actions as a service endpoint, and it's just giving me the performance metric. Here, like I told you, there is no trace route for these transactions. Then you have your database calls. This is basically giving you information regarding your exit points for database calls, what type of database call it is, and other performance metrics. Then you have your remote web services. These will be your web services and other external service calls that you make. With this, we can conclude our AppD APM section. If you have understood these concepts clearly, you are set to implement instrumentation for any application that is given to you. I suggest you explore more on this part and explore the documentation for better understanding. Thank you for watching. Hope this was helpful. Happy learning.